All right, hello and welcome. In this video, we are looking at the intro to quadratics. So a little bit of just kind of background information. Remember that a quadratic equation is one that has x squared as the biggest exponent. So if you see an x cubed or an x to the power of 4 or 5, something like that, then you're not necessarily looking at whatever it is that we're going to go over the rest of today. There may be similarities, but we're going to come back to those guys at a later time. So specifically for quadratics, when we graph a quadratic equation, we should get something that looks like this, which if you recall is a parabola. So if we have a positive x squared, we get a parabola with the arrows facing up. And then if we get a negative x squared, we know it's going to reflect and basically flip this over, and we'll look at one that has that happening in a bit. So when we look at the equations of a quadratic, there's different forms that we can write the equations in, similar to with lines, where you have your slope intercept and your standard form and your point slope form. The ones that we're going to be looking at in this video are standard form and factored form. So standard form is basically when we have it written out like we normally see it. So something with x squared plus something with x plus possibly an extra number on the end. Factored form is basically what we were looking at in the previous section, where we go through and factor our equation and get the multiple factors in the parentheses. So the new information here is that whatever numbers we have in our factors, those guys are going to represent our x-intercepts. They may also be called roots, solutions, or zeros as well. So I want you guys to know that these terms at the bottom here are all very, very similar to each other, and a lot of times will get used interchangeably. So now let's look at an example of how we're going to use this in an actual problem. So notice what we have here is a graph of a parabola, and we are asked to write the equation both in factored form and in standard form. So to do this, we want to remember that the factored form is related to our x-intercepts, right? So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my graph, and I'm going to find where the parabola crosses the x-axis. So I have a point here, and a point here. And if I notice my scale on this graph, that first point actually lines up with -2, even though it's only one grid mark. So just so I don't forget that, I'm going to mark that point as -2, 0. And then since that other point, it looks like it's between the 4 and the 6, I'm going to mark that guy as -5, 0. And so now that I've got my x-intercepts labeled, I want to bring your attention to this very, very important fact that's highlighted in red right here. Your x-intercepts will always bring your factor to 0. Right? So whatever my x-intercept is, if I put that in for x in the factored form, I should get zeros in all my parentheses, which is why one of the alternate names for x-intercepts is zeros. So what I'm going to do here is use these x-intercepts to write my factors. So if I see an x-intercept of -5, then I need a factor of x plus 5, because negative 5 plus 5 equals 0. If I see a factor of negative 2, then I need a factor of x plus 2 in the parentheses. So once again, my x-intercepts combine with my factors to make 0. So negative 5 goes with positive 5, and negative 2 goes with positive 2. So we took our x-intercepts, right, of negative 5 and negative 2. We plugged those in to our factors with the numbers that make them 0, so x plus 5 and x plus 2. So to get our standard form, basically what we're going to do is multiply the two factors out using the methods that we've seen before to convert it into standard form. So once again, we're going to start with our box. Since we want to multiply the numbers together, we know that the things being multiplied always go on the outside. So I need an x plus 5 over here and an x plus 2 over here. And then we'll just distribute like we had done previously. So x times x gives me x squared. X times 2 gives me plus 2x. 5 times x gives me 5x. And then 5 times 2 gives me 10. And then we notice that the middle terms both have x. So I have a 2x and a 5x. So of course I know 5x plus 2x gives me 7x. So when I'm writing out my standard form, I will have y equals x squared plus 7x plus 10. All right, so for our second example, we're going to do much the same way. We're going to start by figuring out where our graph crosses the x-axis. So it looks like I have a point over here at positive 2, and then a point over here at negative 3. So I've labeled my x-intercepts, and now I need to remember that my factored form goes with the x-intercepts to make zeros. So if I see a negative 3 on the x-axis, that means I need a factor of x plus 3. And if I see a positive 2 on my x-axis, that means I need an x minus 2 in the parentheses. And so the only other thing that I need to watch out for is that this time my parabola has been flipped. So since the ends of the parabola are pointing down, that means my parabola has been reflected, which means I need a negative 1 in front of the parentheses. So once again, if my graph is reflected, if it's facing down instead of up, I need an extra negative 1 in front of the parentheses. So from here, we're just going to follow the same steps that we did previously to get our standard form. So once again, we had a reflected graph. We had our x-intercepts as negative 3 and 2. So we converted that into factored form by putting x plus 3, x minus 2 in the parentheses, and then an extra negative 1 in front due to the reflection. So to find standard form, now we're just going to multiply everything together. We technically have 3 things being multiplied, so we just need to do them 2 at a time. So I'm going to start with the -1 and the x plus 3. So just distribute that to what's in the parentheses. So -1 times x gives me -x. And then -1 times 3 gives me -3. So then what I'm going to do is take the -x minus 3 and multiply it with the second parentheses, which is x minus 2. So I'm going to distribute -x to the top, so I get -x times x, which is -x squared. I get -x times -2, which is positive 2x. I get -3 times x, which is minus 3x. And then -3 and -2 multiply to positive 6. Just like last time, I have my x's in the middle that combine. So if I do -3x plus 2x, that would give me a -1x, or in this case, a -x. So my standard form is going to be y equals -x squared minus x plus 6. So if they give us something like number 10, it's the same thing as we were just doing, but this time they have given us everything written out instead of in a graph. The key is that we notice the word roots, which we know is the same as x-intercepts. So if my roots are -7 and -11, then my factors are x plus 7 and x plus 11. My standard form then would be y equals x squared plus 18x plus 77. And I got that by multiplying with the box just like we did in the previous two examples. So for number 11, I've done something very similar. I've gone ahead and set up my factors with x plus 5 and x minus 7. I've gone ahead and multiplied everything out using the box to get x squared minus 2x minus 35. So if I'm going through my choices, I notice that choice A doesn't seem to work because the middle term, instead of being minus 2x, is plus 2x. So I know I can take that guy out. When I look at choice D, I notice that the 2x is missing entirely, so that's not going to work. I notice that choice B almost works, except they have the equal sign in between the 2x and the 35, which I know is not what I want. So I'm going to take this guy out. So it looks like my best choice is C, even though the numbers don't match. So what I need to do is figure out what they did to come up with that answer. And so the important thing to look at here is this 2 in front of the x squared. And so if I put an extra factor of 2 here, that tells me that I would need to then multiply my standard form numbers by 2. And so when I distribute that 2, I get a 2x squared, I get a 4x, and then 35 times 2 would become 70, which now matches choice C. That's all I have for this one. I will see you guys next time.